Abandonment in the night. It began in the silence of early morning, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your heartbeat feel like thunder. At exactly 3:07 a.m., 11-year-old Melissa Harper was yanked from sleep by the unmistakable sound of keys rattling and the slow, deliberate creak of her bedroom door opening. She sat up, confused and disoriented, her mind slow to register what her body already sensed. Something was terribly wrong. Standing in the doorway was her stepmother, Diane, dressed in a jacket and jeans, her expression cold, unreadable. "Get up, now!" The command cut through the dark like a blade. Melissa blinked, heart thudding, her voice trembling as she asked, "What's happening? Where are we going?" But Diane offered no answer, only movement. She strode across the hallway to the room of Melissa's 4-year-old brother, Eric, and shook him awake with a rough urgency that ignored his tiny whimpers of confusion. Melissa scrambled out of bed, the chill of the hardwood floor biting at her feet. Instinctively, she reached for her little brother's hand, his fingers curling tightly around hers like he always did when scared. He didn't understand what was happening, and truthfully, neither did she. "Put these on," Diane snapped, throwing worn sneakers onto the floor for Melissa and Velcro shoes for Eric. There was no warmth in her tone, no explanation, just haste. No one had time to ask the questions that should have been asked. Questions about their father, who had been gone for 3 days on yet another business trip. When Melissa dared to ask if he was home, Diane's answer came like a slap to the face. "Your father isn't coming back. He's gone for good this time." The words felt like a punch to Melissa's stomach. Her dad had never abandoned them before. Not really. No matter how bad things got between him and Diane, he always came back. He promised. But now Diane said those promises meant nothing. She yanked Melissa's arm hard and pushed the kids into the hallway. No one spoke. No one cried. The silence was too heavy, too unreal. The outside air hit like a wave, cold, damp, smelling faintly of wet earth and spring rain. Diane ushered them into her old sedan, the trunk already packed with suitcases. Where were they going? Why now in the dead of night? Questions swirled in Melissa's mind, but fear smothered every one of them. The ride was quiet except for the occasional snuffle from Eric and the soft whoosh of windshield wipers brushing away the light drizzle. Melissa watched the streets pass by in a blur, familiar neighborhoods giving way to unknown intersections. She knew she should memorize landmarks, but her brain was a fog of confusion and fear. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, Diane pulled the car to a stop in front of a looming stone building, St. Catherine's Church. Its tall steeple pierced the sky like a silent sentinel. Diane turned off the engine and simply said, "Out." Melissa stared at her. "Why are we at a church? It's the middle of the night." Diane didn't answer. She opened the door and gestured sharply. "Just get out." Melissa helped Eric climb out of the car. He was shaking, whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. Probably both. They followed Diane up the stone steps until she stopped beneath the overhang of the large wooden doors. In the dim orange glow of the street lamps, something flickered across Diane's face. Something Melissa had never seen before. Was it guilt? Regret? It vanished quickly, replaced by cold finality. "Sit here," Diane said. "Someone will find you when morning comes." The weight of realization crashed into Melissa like a tidal wave. "You're leaving us here," she whispered. Her voice cracked as she spoke the truth aloud, hoping saying it would somehow make it less real. But Diane didn't deny it. "I can, and I am," she replied. "Your father's gone. I didn't sign up to raise someone else's kids alone." Melissa's protest spilled out in frantic pleas, her voice trembling, her tears breaking free. "We're family. Please, Diane, don't do this." But Diane's eyes hardened like stone. "We were never family. You were just baggage, and your father dumped you on me." Eric began to cry in earnest now, burying his face in Melissa's side. He didn't understand what was being said, but he felt the truth in the air. His world was changing in a terrifying way. Diane hesitated for a single breath and then pulled a small, creased photograph from her pocket. It was a picture of Melissa and Eric with their real mother, taken years ago before cancer took her away. "Here," she said, thrusting it into Melissa's hands. "It's the only thing of yours I could find. The rest is still at the house. I'll be gone by noon." Melissa took the photo, her fingers trembling. It was one of the few tangible memories left of their mother, the woman who had loved them fiercely, who would have never left them. Pray that someone will care for you, Diane said, her voice now distant, hollow, because I can't anymore. She turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. Not once. Melissa's cries echoed down the empty street. Diane got in her car, started the engine, and disappeared into the darkness, her taillights the last traces of the only adult left in their lives. Melissa stood frozen. Eric's hand was still clutched in hers. They were alone, two children abandoned in the early hours of the morning with nothing but each other and a faded photograph. When Eric whispered, "Are we going home soon?" Melissa swallowed hard and said the only thing she could, "I'm here. I'll take care of you." As they sat together on the cold stone steps, with rain beginning to fall harder and the church bells ringing out 4 a.m., Melissa made a silent vow. Whatever happened next, she would never leave her brother. They would face this together, even if no one else came, strangers who care. Morning arrived slowly, spilling soft gold across the stone steps where Melissa Harper sat clutching her sleeping little brother. The air was damp, and every muscle in her body ached from sitting upright all night. But she hadn't dared to fall asleep. Not fully. She had stayed alert, half watching the dark street, half listening for footsteps that never came. Each sound, a passing car, a rustling branch, had felt like it might be someone returning for them, but no one came. Not Diane, not their father. Only silence. And now, as the world slowly stirred awake around them, reality was settling in like cold water in her chest. They had been left, truly left. For a fleeting second, Melissa allowed herself to believe it had all been a terrible dream, that she'd wake up any minute in her warm bed, her dad cooking eggs downstairs. But the harsh stone steps beneath her and the photograph crumpled in her fist told the truth. This was no dream. It was the beginning of something terrifyingly real. "Hello there," came a voice soft but clear, like sunlight breaking through fog. Melissa's head snapped up. An elderly woman stood at the foot of the steps. She wore a cardigan over a floral dress, a cloth shopping bag hanging from one hand, and an expression that blended concern with careful kindness. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly, and her posture was that of someone who carried quiet strength. "Are you children all right?" she asked, stepping a little closer. "Have you been here all night?" Melissa instinctively tightened her arm around Eric. Her father had always told her not to trust strangers, but right now they had nothing, no home, no food, no answers. The woman's eyes didn't look cruel. They looked worried, but not in a way that made Melissa feel small, in a way that felt genuine. "We're fine," Melissa said quickly, the lie catching in her throat. Our mom is inside. She's praying." It was the first thing she could think of. The woman's brows lifted slightly. "The church doesn't open until 8, dear." Melissa's face burned with fear and shame. Before she could stumble through another excuse, the heavy church doors behind them creaked open. Both she and the woman jumped. A man in his 50s stepped out, dressed in simple black clothes with a white clerical collar. "I thought I heard voices," he said, glancing between the children and the woman. His name tag read Father Thomas. His voice held calm authority, and Melissa felt herself exhale a little. "Mrs. Patterson," the priest said, clearly recognizing the woman. "Good morning, and who might these young ones be?" Before Mrs. Patterson could answer, Eric stirred against Melissa's side, rubbing his eyes. "Melissa, I'm hungry," he murmured. Loudly, loud enough that Father Thomas heard him and immediately softened. "Well then," the priest said gently, "why don't you come inside? I was just about to have breakfast myself." Melissa hesitated. Her stomach twisted in hunger, but her instincts still screamed for caution. "We shouldn't," she said. "We need to wait for—" The words died in her throat. Wait for who? For someone who was never coming back? For someone who isn't coming? Mrs. Patterson asked quietly, with no judgment, only understanding. Melissa looked at her in shock. "How did you—" "I live across the street," Mrs. Patterson said, nodding toward a small house with blue shutters. "I saw what happened last night. I called Father Thomas right away." There it was, proof that someone had seen, that someone cared, that they hadn't just vanished into the night without a trace. Father Thomas extended his hand. "You're safe here. Whatever's happened, we can figure it out. But first, breakfast." Melissa looked at Eric. He stared up at her, his cheeks pale and eyes pleading. "I'm really hungry," he whispered. She nodded slowly, letting Father Thomas guide them into the rectory. The warmth of the church walls hit her like a wave. It smelled like toast and coffee, like safety. In the small kitchen, the priest prepared bowls of cereal and plates of cut fruit. Eric devoured his like he hadn't eaten in days. Melissa tried to eat, but each bite felt like it turned to stone in her mouth. "So," Father Thomas asked gently once their bowls were mostly empty, "would you like to tell me your names?" "I'm Melissa," she said. "This is my brother Eric. I'm 11. He's 4. "And the woman who left you?" Melissa looked down. "Diane, our stepmother." Mrs. Patterson, now seated beside them with her shopping bag set aside, exchanged a glance with Father Thomas. "And your father, dear?" she asked. Melissa's throat tightened. "Gone," she whispered. "Diane said he's not coming back this time." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was filled with weight, the kind that adults make when they're trying to think of how to help a situation far bigger than it seems. Father Thomas stood. "I've already called social services," he said. "Someone will come soon to figure out what's best for you." Fear shot through Melissa like electricity. "Social services?" Her voice rose with panic. "You mean foster care?" "No, they'll separate us. I promised Eric I'd take care of him." Eric looked up from his spoon, eyes wide and confused. "Melissa, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Buddy," she said quickly, trying to paste on a smile, but her hands were shaking. "Melissa, wait," Father Thomas said, stepping closer. "You don't have to face this alone. The social worker is just coming to talk. No one is going to separate you if there's any way to avoid it." Mrs. Patterson's voice was steady, calming. "Why don't I take Eric to the garden and back while you talk to Father Thomas?" she suggested. "There's a little fountain with goldfish. I think he might like that." Melissa hesitated. Her instincts to protect her brother were fierce, but the offer felt right. Eric looked up at her, hopeful. "Goldfish?" "Okay," she relented, "just for a few minutes." As she watched Mrs. Patterson take Eric's hand and lead him out to the garden, Melissa sank into her chair, the emotional weight of the last 12 hours pressing on her chest. Her mind raced, but her heart was slower, just beginning to grasp something that had been missing for so long. The kindness of strangers. Real kindness, not transactional, not forced. It came in the form of warm cereal, a soft cardigan, a priest's quiet steadiness in a garden filled with goldfish. For the first time since she'd been left on those stone steps in the middle of the night, Melissa allowed herself to believe maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as she thought. The fear of foster care. Melissa had known fear before, the kind that came with thunder at night or loud arguments behind closed doors. But this was different. This fear had teeth. It gripped her chest and refused to let go. As she sat at the kitchen table inside the rectory, a bowl of half-eaten cereal growing soggy in front of her, the words echoed in her head like a drumbeat. "Social services are coming." Father Thomas had said it gently, but the effect on Melissa was immediate and visceral. Social services didn't mean help, not to her. To her, it meant one thing, separation. It meant losing Eric. Eric, who had fallen asleep curled up on her side after their mother died. Eric, who still called her Lissy when he was sleepy and reached for her hand in the dark. Eric, who believed, without question, that his big sister could keep the world from hurting him. Melissa had promised him, again and again, that she would never leave, that they'd always be together. And now that promise was cracking beneath the weight of bureaucracy and well-meaning strangers. The fear in her eyes hadn't gone unnoticed. Mrs. Patterson returned from the garden with Eric, who was delightfully babbling about goldfish in a flower that smelled like candy. But Melissa wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the doorway, expecting at any moment a stranger in a blazer with a clipboard to appear and tell her she no longer had a choice. "Melissa?" Mrs. Patterson said gently, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You've gone pale, sweetheart. Breathe." Melissa tried, she really did, but the breath got stuck somewhere in her throat. "They're going to take us," she whispered, barely audible. "I just know it. They're going to put me in one house and Eric in another. And he's only 4. He'll be scared. And it'll be my fault because I couldn't stop it." "No," Father Thomas said firmly, sitting down across from her. "That is not what's going to happen. We don't even know the full situation yet. No one is here to tear your family apart." "But they will," Melissa insisted. They always do in the stories. Kids get separated, and then they never find each other again. Mrs. Patterson knelt beside her. Honey, listen to me. I don't know what will happen yet, but I do know this. You're not alone anymore, and I won't let them do that without a fight. Melissa blinked, startled by the intensity in the elderly woman's eyes. There was steel behind that softness. Not anger, but resolve. The kind of strength Melissa had only seen in women who had survived loss. And that gave her the tiniest sliver of hope. But it was still fragile, like a bird's wing. Just then, the door opened. A woman entered with a warm smile, a notepad in her hand, and a state-issued badge clipped to her coat. Good morning, I'm Valerie Chen. I work with Child Protective Services. Melissa's stomach dropped. Here it was, the moment her world might split in two. Ms. Chen took a seat across from her and spoke with a voice that was kind, but practiced. I understand you and your brother had a difficult night. I'm here to talk to you, to learn more about what happened, and to make sure you're both safe. Melissa cut straight to the point. We need to stay together. Ms. Chen paused, then nodded. Family unity is always our priority when possible. Melissa wasn't convinced. What does that mean? When possible? That's not a promise. No, it's not, Ms. Chen admitted gently, because every case is different. But I want you to know that I've already spoken to Father Thomas and Mrs. Patterson, and we're all on the same page. We want what's best for both of you. At that moment, Eric toddled into the room holding a dandelion in one hand and dragging a paper airplane in the other. Melissa, look what I made. Melissa caught him in a hug, breathing him in like oxygen. She looked back at the social worker, eyes brimming with unshed tears. He's all I have. I understand, Ms. Chen said. I've seen many children go through transitions like this, and I've seen siblings stay together. It is very possible, but I have to ask you a few more questions about your home life, about Diane, about your father. Can we do that? Melissa nodded slowly, not because she wanted to, but because she knew she had no choice. As the questions began, Mrs. Patterson stepped away with Eric, promising to let him pick another flower in the garden. Melissa answered everything as best she could, about her dad being gone, about Diane's behavior growing stranger, colder, about the fights, about the last thing her stepmother said before driving away. I never signed up to raise someone else's kids. Ms. Chen listened closely, taking notes, her brow furrowed in compassion. When they were done, she closed her folder and said, For now, we need to find a temporary placement for you and your brother. We'll contact your father if we can. Do you have any other relatives? Melissa shook her head. None that I know of. Our mom's gone. Her parents are dead. Dad's family lives somewhere far. I don't remember. There was a long pause, then a voice from the hallway. I could take them. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. Her voice was calm but steady as stone. Just temporarily, of course, until we figure something out. Melissa gasped. You'd do that? If the alternative is splitting you up, the woman replied, then absolutely. Miss Chen looked surprised. Are you a certified foster parent? No, Mrs. Patterson admitted, but I was a school teacher for 40 years. I live across the street. Father Thomas can vouch for me. She's one of our most trusted parishioners, he added quickly. She volunteers for every outreach program we have. Ms. Chen hesitated. It's not standard procedure. Please, Melissa whispered, more desperate than she'd ever felt. We won't be any trouble. I promise, Visoas. Chen studied the elderly woman, then the girl, then glanced toward the garden where Eric played. We'd need to do an emergency home inspection and a background check. Whatever is necessary, Mrs. Patterson said without hesitation. Melissa's chest ached, but this time with hope instead of fear. Maybe she wouldn't lose everything. Maybe some promises could still be kept. A deeper conspiracy. Melissa had expected answers. What she got instead was a letter. Letter creased, stained, and handed to her by a police officer whose eyes flickered with sympathy. The name scrawled across the envelope, hers and Eric's, was in her father's handwriting. Her heart leapt for a moment. It meant he was alive. But as she read the words, that hope turned sour. Her father wasn't just missing. He was running. And worse, he was leaving them behind. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm sorry. Dangerous people are looking for me. You're safer without me. Each sentence landed like a blow. Melissa read it twice, then again, her hands trembling. Her mind was racing with questions. What had he done? What did he mean by dangerous people? Her father was an accountant, the kind of man who wore the same brown shoes every day and kept his receipts in labeled folders. He made corny dad jokes and grilled hot dogs on Sundays. He wasn't the kind of person who vanished in the night with cryptic warnings about dangerous people. And yet, here was the truth in his own words. The officer said the car had been found abandoned near a bus station, and worse, there was blood. Not a lot, but enough to worry them. Melissa felt like the floor was giving out beneath her. First Diane, now this. Her world had collapsed in less than 24 hours, and now it seemed there was a darkness to her father she had never suspected. Rebecca, Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, entered their lives just as the questions grew heavier. A social worker with her own haunted past, she came not as a government official, but as someone who understood what it meant to be left behind. She offered Melissa not just logistics, but humanity. She understood the difference between being placed somewhere safe and actually feeling safe. Rebecca's arrival coincided with Officer Reynolds' updates, and with each piece of information, the puzzle of Melissa's father grew more twisted. He had made large cash withdrawals, over $50,000, from an account no one even knew existed. Where did the money come from? And more importantly, wait, I know. But the most shocking truth came when Rebecca answered a phone call, her normally calm face growing tight. "Melissa," she said carefully, "your father wasn't just running, he was working with the FBI." The words sounded like something from a movie. FBI, informant, financial crimes. It didn't compute. "He's an accountant," Melissa whispered, stunned. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "That's how it started. The FBI believes he discovered financial irregularities at the firm he worked for, laundering, fraud, possibly worse. Instead of turning a blind eye, he reported it. They brought him on as a confidential informant." Melissa felt dizzy. Her dad had always been quiet, serious, even distant since her mom died, but she never imagined he was secretly involved in a criminal investigation. "Then why didn't he tell us?" "To protect you," Rebecca replied. "He kept his work and family life completely separate. Not even Diane knew the full truth." Melissa shook her head. "If he was protecting us, why leave us?" Rebecca sighed, her voice more gentle now. "Because his cover was blown. Someone found out he was helping the FBI. They think he fled to protect you from retaliation." Melissa didn't know what to feel. Grief, betrayal, relief, pride. It all swirled inside her like a storm. She wanted to be angry, but more than anything, she wanted answers. Had her father truly believed they'd be better off without him? Did he think that abandoning them would save their lives? Agent Ramirez, the FBI agent who had worked with Daniel Harper, confirmed it all. She showed up with files, timelines, and more questions. The agency had lost contact with Melissa's father 3 days ago, just after he missed a scheduled meeting. "We believe he was trying to draw attention away from your location," Ramirez said. "He wanted the people chasing him to follow him, not come after you." Ramirez revealed that the case involved Magnus Capital Group, a seemingly legitimate financial firm that was allegedly laundering millions and funding black market operations. It was massive, dangerous, and Daniel Harper had been in the middle of it. The USB drive Melissa found hidden in Eric's favorite bedtime book might contain the very evidence that could unravel the entire operation. "What if they come after us?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's why we're moving you," Ramirez said firmly, "to a safe house, under protection. Just in case." And yet it wasn't just the outside world that held secrets. Inside Melissa's own memories, new questions began to take shape. Her father had changed in the past year. He'd been more distracted, more tired. He started locking his office, canceling family outings. Was it because of this? Had he been carrying the weight of a secret life, of danger, of betrayal, all while tucking them in at night? And then there was Diane. She hadn't just panicked and left them at the church. As more information came to light, it became clear. She had secrets too. She wasn't just a cruel woman overwhelmed by responsibility. She had her own ties to the people Daniel was investigating. Whether through fear or collusion, she had played a role in their unraveling. Melissa clutched Eric closer that night, trying to make sense of a life that suddenly felt like fiction. Her father, a hero, a traitor, a man running from criminals, from the FBI, from his own guilt. But through the confusion, one thing became clear. The truth mattered. It had the power to destroy, but also to protect. And her father, despite all his flaws, had risked everything to do the right thing. He wasn't just gone, he was fighting. And now it was Melissa's turn to be brave, protecting Eric at all costs. If the world was falling apart, then Melissa Harper would be its last line of defense. For one person, at least, her little brother, Eric. At just 11 years old, Melissa hadn't asked for the responsibility of being his protector. But when their mother died, when their father started disappearing for days at a time on business, and especially when Diane drove them into the night and left them on the cold stone steps of a church, Melissa had understood something with bone-deep clarity. No one else was coming. If Eric was going to be safe, it was up to her, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. In every moment since, it had become second nature, grabbing his hand before he wandered too far, cutting his sandwich crust just the way he liked, reading him the same bedtime story 3 times because he asked with those big pleading eyes. These things weren't chores, they were lifelines. Even in the face of social workers and safe houses, even in the presence of terrifying new truths about their father's secret life, Melissa's focus never strayed far from Eric. No matter what chaos loomed, she kept anchoring herself to the promise she made silently on the steps of St. Catherine's Church. He will not be alone. He will not be afraid. And yet fear still found them. Melissa had learned to spot it in Eric's quietest moments, when he clutched her tighter than usual, when he suddenly wanted his stuffed bear after months of pretending he was too big for it, when his voice trembled just before sleep and he whispered, "When is Daddy coming back?" Each question was a needle to the heart. Each answer required careful calibration. Not a lie, but not too much truth either. He was too young to understand FBI informants, criminal conspiracies, or why the people meant to protect them had failed. So Melissa became the translator between the world's cruelty and his innocence. At Mrs. Parsons Patterson's home, the temporary haven arranged by a miracle of empathy and bureaucracy, Melissa watched Eric begin to soften again. He played in the garden, he laughed at silly cartoons, he asked for cookies before dinner. And yet, beneath all of it, Melissa remained alert. She kept her eyes on the door, checked on him through the night, and always listened for cars passing too slowly on the street. Because knowing what she now knew, that her father had been targeted, that they had been left vulnerable, she could never fully let her guard down. The fear of being separated was never far behind either. Even with Mrs. Patterson's fierce protection and Rebecca's tireless advocacy, Melissa remained haunted by the possibility that someone might show up with a clipboard and a cold explanation that they were doing what's best. She knew what that meant. It meant Eric being sent to a foster home across the city. It meant goodbyes and weekend visits and shared trauma torn apart by paperwork. So she stayed near him, always. When social workers asked questions, she answered calmly but always made sure to include Eric. When new faces appeared, she introduced him first. When the letter from their father revealed his dangerous entanglements and the threat became more than theoretical, she was the one who packed Eric's bag, checked it twice, and held his hand as they were led into the safety of a cabin guarded by FBI agents. She never showed him her fear, not when the truth was revealed, not when bullets were fired, not even when their father collapsed in front of them, bleeding and broken. Because Melissa knew that if she let herself crumble, Eric would follow. There was a moment just after the shooting when it all became too much. The ambulance had taken their father away, Rebecca was making calls, and Mrs. Patterson was trying to gather Eric's things. Melissa had slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and let herself sob silently into a towel. For 10 minutes, she let the weight of everything crush her. Her father's double life, the danger, the betrayal, the abandonment, the unbearable pressure of keeping a 4-year-old boy's world stitched together while her own world collapsed. But when she came out of that bathroom, her eyes still red, but her chin held high, Eric looked up at her and smiled. "Are we going to see Daddy soon?" he asked. Melissa crouched beside him. "Yeah," she said. "We'll see him soon. He's getting better." And she meant it. Not because it was certain, but because he needed to believe. and sometimes belief was as close to protection as she could offer. Even in moments of peace, Melissa carried the weight. At the cabin, while Eric played with toys and explored the woods outside, Melissa would sit nearby, watching like a sentinel. Her hands might have held a book or her sketch pad, but her ears were always tuned to his voice, her eyes flicking up every few seconds to make sure he was still there. He was her heartbeat in motion. If anything happened to him, she didn't finish the thought. She couldn't. But she also began to see something remarkable. Her protection wasn't just a burden. It was shaping her. It was transforming grief into responsibility, fear into courage. She was becoming the kind of person her mother had once been, the kind who fought quietly, fiercely, with love as her shield. It didn't feel heroic. Most days it just felt exhausting. But in the quiet of the night, when Eric curled up beside her and whispered, "You're the best sister," something in her chest would soften. And for a moment, it felt like enough. Melissa didn't know what would come next. The FBI was still searching for answers. Uncle Joe was still just a name. Their father was alive but recovering. But she did know this. No matter how long it took, no matter what dangers came their way, she would not let Eric fall. She would be his home until they found one. She would be his mother, sister, guardian, protector. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't imagine being anything else. Because sometimes family isn't about who protects you. It's about who refuses to leave, no matter what. The return of their father in sudden danger. Melissa had barely taken a full breath since the moment her life began unraveling. Each day brought a new layer of fear, another truth no child should have to carry. But nothing, not Diane's abandonment, not the letter her father had left behind, not the knowledge that they were caught in the crosshairs of something much bigger than themselves, could have prepared her for the moment he came back. It wasn't the kind of return you dream about when you've spent nights hoping for one. There was no open-armed reunion, no soft music swelling in the background. It came with screeching tires, shouted warnings, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Melissa had just stepped outside the house, Rebecca at her side, Eric safe elsewhere, when the black sedan swerved around the corner. For a heartbeat, time froze. Then chaos erupted. The car slammed to a halt, and a man stumbled out. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Bloodied, wild-eyed, his movements frantic. Then he said her name. Melissa. Her father. She ran before anyone could stop her, before her mind could process anything but the aching truth of it. He came back, but his arms around her were weak, trembling. He was bleeding, his shirt soaked through with blood and sweat. "Thank God," he gasped, clutching her like a man drowning in the dark. "You're safe." But safety was still out of reach. From the passenger side, another figure emerged, a stranger with a gun and eyes like ice, the barrel of the weapon aimed directly at them. "Nobody move," he said, calm as winter. Melissa didn't scream, didn't flinch. Her father's body shielded hers, his voice urgent in her ear. "When I say run, you run to Rebecca. Don't look back." That's when she understood. He hadn't just come back. He had been followed. The man, later identified as Sutton, wasn't there to finish what had started. He was there to silence it. Melissa listened as he and her father traded words, accusations, threats, revelations that blurred together in the haze of adrenaline. Sutton called it betrayal. Her father called it justice. Sutton demanded the USB drive, the tiny piece of plastic Melissa had found hidden in a bedtime book, now safely in Agent Ramirez's hands. Then a siren in the distance cut through the tension. A flicker of hesitation in Sutton's stance was all Agent Ramirez needed. "Now!" she shouted. Everything exploded at once. Movement, gunshots, shouts of, "Get down!" Melissa was pulled away, shoved behind a car by Rebecca's steady hands. Her father tried to run after her, but he stumbled. Blood poured fast from his side. Melissa screamed. Rebecca held her back. More shots. Sutton retreating, tires screeching. The sound of his escape fading. And then silence. Just her father collapsing in a pool of red. He was barely conscious, whispering words Melissa could barely hear through the thunder of her own heartbeat. "I'm so sorry, so proud." His hand went limp in hers. Melissa had always thought the worst part of abandonment was the moment it happened. But now she realized something worse. Getting someone back only to lose them again. The ambulance arrived. Lights flashing, voices barking orders, blood pressure, internal bleeding, transport, ICU. Melissa clung to the side of the gurney until they told her she couldn't, and then the waiting began. In the sterile chill of the hospital, hours felt like days. Agent Ramirez paced, making calls. Officer Reynolds updated the team. Rebecca kept Melissa grounded with steady eyes and a warm hand on her shoulder. But nothing could quiet the storm inside her. Had her father really returned just to die in front of her? Was that his fate after sacrificing everything? His job, his family, his safety, for justice? The doctor finally came. His face was serious, but not grim. "He's stable," he said. "He lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. He'll need time, but he's alive." Melissa crumpled into a chair, tears falling freely. He's alive, not lost, not dead, not a ghost of a man in a bloody sedan. Her father was fighting, still. Later, Agent Ramirez confirmed what Melissa had feared and suspected. Sutton wasn't just a thug, he was a key figure in the criminal ring her father had exposed. And Diane, she hadn't just been a bitter stepmother. She was involved, planted in their family as a surveillance tool by her brother, one of the executives at Magnus Capital. Her abandonment had been a mix of fear, loyalty, and guilt. She had run too, but not without leaving behind one last piece of the puzzle, a safety deposit box filled with photos of Melissa and Eric's real mother. Proof, perhaps, that Diane had been more than just a villain in their story. Still flawed, still broken, but human. None of this made what happened okay, but it made it real. Melissa sat beside her father's hospital bed that night, his breathing steady, tubes snaking from his arms. She whispered everything she hadn't been able to say, how scared she was, how strong she'd tried to be, how much Eric missed him. She told him about Mrs. Patterson's cookies and Rebecca's fierce loyalty. She told him he was forgiven and loved. "I found the drive," she said quietly. "I know why you did what you did, and we're going to be okay." When his fingers twitched in hers, she smiled through tears. Maybe it wasn't just reflex. Maybe he heard her. And maybe, for the first time in weeks, she believed it. Confronting the past and the truth about Diane's betrayal doesn't always arrive with a knife in the back. Sometimes it comes wearing the face of someone you called family. That's what Melissa came to understand in the days that followed her father's return and recovery, as the pieces of their story, long scattered like broken glass, began to form a coherent but painful reflection of the truth. Diane, the woman who had tucked Eric in at night, who had signed school permission slips and stirred spaghetti sauce on the stove, had never truly been their stepmother. Not in the way that mattered. She had been a spider-eye, a plant, a pawn in a game far bigger than Melissa had ever imagined. And worse yet, she had played her role so well that even Melissa's father hadn't seen it coming. It was Agent Ramirez who delivered the final blow. Diane Harper, whose real name was Victoria Reeves, hadn't simply married their father for love or companionship after their mother passed. She had been placed in his life deliberately, recruited by her own brother, Martin Reeves, CFO of Magnus Capital, the very company their father was investigating. The goal was surveillance, control, access. Daniel Harper was becoming a threat to the empire Magnus had built on fraud and secrecy, and the quickest way to neutralize that threat was to get close, very close. Marriage, trust, family. Every detail of Diane's involvement was carefully orchestrated. As Melissa sat across from Ramirez in a dim conference room, she felt the air thicken with disbelief. Diane had been part of their most vulnerable years. She had brushed their hair, helped with homework, occasionally even smiled like she meant it. And yet, every hug, every moment of apparent concern had been rooted in something rotten. "She married him to spy on him?" Melissa whispered, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "To spy on us?" Agent Ramirez nodded slowly. "At first, we believe she genuinely developed feelings for your father, and for you and Eric. But when things started unraveling, she panicked." Panic. That's what they called it. Melissa wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Panic was missing a bus. Panic was forgetting a test. What Diane had done, driving them to a church at 3 a.m., abandoning 2 kids with nothing but a photo and vague instructions to pray, that was something else, something colder. Melissa wanted to believe that somewhere in Diane's twisted, conflicted heart, there had been guilt. regret. But the memory of her emotionless voice saying, "We were never family," echoed too loudly to be drowned by maybes. Still, the picture was more complicated than Melissa had expected. Diane had agreed to testify against her brother. She had confessed, in detail, to her role and provided additional information that corroborated Daniel's evidence. Her cooperation would likely reduce her sentence. Minimal jail time, maybe probation. Legally, she would pay her debt. But morally, Melissa wasn't sure such things could be measured. How do you forgive someone who made you feel unworthy of love? Who left you in the dark, literally and emotionally, and never once looked back? The most gut-wrenching part came when Rebecca, now fully woven into the fabric of their lives, handed Melissa a small, weathered envelope. Diane's handwriting was instantly recognizable. Melissa hesitated, then opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page and a small key. The note read, "Melissa, by the time you read this, I'll be gone from your life, which is for the best. What I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know, in the end, I truly did care for you and Eric. More than was wise for someone in my position." The key opens a safety deposit box. Inside are photos of your mother I found in your father's study and kept hidden. They deserve to be with you. I hope someday you find it in your heart, if not to forgive me, then to understand that people can be both terribly wrong and genuinely caring at the same time. Diane. Melissa read it twice, then a third time, and still the knot in her chest didn't untangle. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she felt a strange emptiness. Not quite anger, not quite relief, just space where trust used to live. Rebecca watched her carefully, saying nothing until Melissa finally whispered, "I don't know what to feel." "You don't have to know right now," Rebecca said gently. "Sometimes understanding comes before emotion. Sometimes it's the other way around." Later at the bank, Melissa unlocked the safety deposit box with shaking hands. Inside were the photos Diane had mentioned, real physical evidence of the love they'd once had as a family. Melissa's mother beaming as she held Eric in her arms. A picture of all four of them, before the cancer, before Diane, before everything. The tears came then, not for Diane, but for the innocence that had been stolen, for a life she could never return to, and maybe, just maybe, for a woman who had been caught between two versions of herself and failed them both. Confronting the truth about Diane didn't bring closure in a neat, satisfying way. There was no final confrontation, no climactic speech. Diane didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't get the redemption arc, but what Melissa did get was agency, the ability to choose how to carry the truth. She didn't have to carry it with hatred. She didn't have to let it consume her. She could acknowledge the pain, learn from it, and leave it behind like a shadow that no longer had power over her. Back at Mrs. Patterson's house that night, Melissa sat on the porch swing, Eric curled up asleep inside, the stars above a little brighter than usual. Rebecca joined her, offering a cup of hot chocolate and a quiet companionship Melissa had come to value more than words. "I don't know if I'll ever understand Diane," Melissa murmured. "You don't have to," Rebecca replied. "Some truths aren't meant to be solved, just lived with and moved through." Melissa nodded, breathing in the cool evening air. The truth about Diane was jagged, but it didn't define her. It didn't define Eric. It didn't define their future. They were more than the sum of what had been done to them. They were survivors, yes, but more than that. They were rebuilding together. And in that slow, quiet process of healing, Melissa learned something far greater than justice or revenge. That the past may shape you, but it does not have to trap you. Healing and the power of found family healing, Melissa came to understand, didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly like dawn after the longest night. It began not with grand gestures, but with the quiet kindness of people who didn't have to care, but did. Mrs. Patterson, with her cinnamon-scented kitchen and weathered hands that knew just how to hold a child who couldn't stop crying. Rebecca, whose past pain mirrored Melissa's in ways unspoken, but deeply felt. And even her father, Daniel Harper, whose bruised body and battered soul began to show signs of restoration once the secrets no longer sat like stones on his chest. These people became something more than a patchwork of support. They became family. Not the kind bound by blood, but the kind chosen in the crucible of hardship. It was Mrs. Patterson who first taught Melissa that love didn't have to look like perfection. She made mistakes, burnt cookies, called Eric by the wrong name, forgot which drawer the socks were in. But she never stopped trying. She never stopped showing up. That, Melissa realized, was the heart of healing, consistent love, even when the world felt inconsistent. In the stillness of the cabin, as federal agents kept watch and news of Sutton's demise confirmed the immediate threat was over, Melissa finally allowed herself to exhale. Not completely, but enough. Enough to believe that maybe they were safe. Enough to believe they could begin again. Daniel's recovery was slow, but every day brought small victories. The first time he sat up without assistance. The moment he read a bedtime story to Eric without his voice shaking. The way he looked at Melissa, not with guilt, but with gratitude. It was as if nearly losing everything had made him remember what mattered most. He was no longer the distracted, distant figure she remembered from before. Now he was present, listening and reaching out, apologizing not just with words, but with action. Melissa, guarded by nature and bruised by experience, didn't rush to forgive, but over time she began to trust again. And that was the real miracle. Not that he came back, but that he stayed. Meanwhile, Rebecca's presence in their lives deepened from advocate to something more enduring. She visited often, no longer just as a social worker, but as a friend, even family. She knew what it felt like to be shuffled, overlooked, left to fend for yourself in a world that didn't seem to care. But she had turned that pain into purpose, and in doing so, she gave Melissa a vision of what her future could be, not defined by what happened to her, but by what she chose to do with it. "I think I want to be like you," Melissa said once hesitantly during a late-night porch conversation. Rebecca didn't smile right away. She just said, "Then you already are." It wasn't only Melissa who changed. Eric too began to blossom. His nightmares became less frequent. His laughter returned. He began to sleep through the night, his small arms no longer clutching his stuffed bear like a lifeline. With stability came innocence. Not the naivete that had been lost, but a new kind. A grounded, cautious kind that still believed in the magic of cookies after school and goldfish in a garden pond. For Melissa, seeing Eric reclaim that joy was the greatest gift. She hadn't failed him. They had survived, together. What truly sealed their path forward, though, wasn't legal paperwork or therapy sessions, though both had their place. It was the way they began to rebuild life. Regular dinners around a mismatched table, Daniel learning how to braid Melissa's hair again, Eric's drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the knowledge that Mrs. Patterson, now affectionately Grandma Jean, was just down the street. Their new house in Oakage didn't have a dramatic backstory or history, but maybe that was the point. It was just a house, one they would fill with new memories, new laughter, and occasionally new ghosts they were learning how to live with. Found family doesn't erase what was lost, but it adds something new, something sturdy. And sometimes, that's enough. A new beginning and redefining family. New beginnings rarely feel like grand events. They don't come with trumpets or neat closure. They arrive quietly, in the sound of a moving box being opened, the flicker of sunlight through new windows, the way someone calls your name in a house that's just starting to feel like home. For Melissa Harper, her new beginning wasn't a single moment, but a collection of them. They had survived betrayal, abandonment, and danger, but more remarkably, they had come out the other side not just intact, but transformed. What had started with a terrifying night on church steps had somehow become the doorway to a life she never expected, but now couldn't imagine letting go of. A life where family didn't mean the people who shared your blood, but the people who chose to stay and love you anyway. Their new home in Oakage wasn't fancy. It didn't have the polished shine of their old life, where things looked fine from the outside but were quietly crumbling within. No, this house was different. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. The backyard had uneven patches of grass. The kitchen cabinets creaked when opened. But none of that mattered. It was theirs. Melissa had her own room again. Not just a bed to sleep in, but a space to breathe, to grow, to feel safe. Eric had a dinosaur-themed bedroom with walls that could hold every drawing he taped up. And Daniel, now officially recovering and working as a financial crimes consultant with the FBI, had an office that didn't hold secrets, only puzzles, paperwork, and the occasional cup of lukewarm coffee. But what made it home wasn't furniture or square footage. It was the rhythm of shared mornings, the laughter echoing from the living room, The late-night stories whispered between siblings in the dark. It was Grandma Jean, once just Mrs. Patterson, walking over with a basket of muffins and staying long enough to read to Eric before bed. It was Rebecca stopping by after work, not as a social worker, but as someone who had become family through the simple act of showing up again and again, even when she didn't have to. Together, they redefined what family looked like. Melissa, for the first time in her life, was not just reacting to trauma, but planning a future. Her past still lived with her. It always would. Some nights, she still woke in a sweat, heart pounding with the memory of a gun aimed at her father's chest. Some moments, she still felt the cold sting of Diane's words. We were never family. But she didn't live in those moments anymore. They were shadows. And shadows only exist because somewhere, light is shining. She poured herself into healing, not just for her own sake, but for Eric's. She wanted her little brother to grow up with the kind of steadiness she'd always longed for. She helped him with homework, practiced spelling words with him at the kitchen table, made goofy faces to coax out giggles on hard days. And slowly she began to find that giving love, freely and fiercely, was its own form of recovery. Love didn't erase the pain, but it reframed it, rewired it. Her relationship with her father grew stronger in unexpected ways. They talked more. He asked questions about her day, listened when she answered. Sometimes he still fumbled. Grief and guilt had left their marks. But Melissa didn't need him to be perfect. She needed him to be there. And now he was. Present, sincere, trying. Their bond wasn't built on pretending everything was fine, but on the courage to admit when it wasn't, and still show up anyway. Rebecca became a fixture in their lives, not just as support, but as a symbol of possibility. She reminded Melissa that broken beginnings could still lead to beautiful endings, or rather beautiful new beginnings. She shared stories of her own journey through the foster system, the heartbreaks and the triumphs, the people who had failed her and the one or two who hadn't. And in doing so, she gave Melissa something rare: permission to hope. To imagine a life where being shaped by trauma didn't mean being defined by it. And Grandma Jean, ever steady, ever kind, became their emotional compass. She brought with her the wisdom of age and the softness of unconditional love. With her around, meals felt warmer, holidays felt fuller. Even Eric's nightmares seemed to lessen just knowing she was nearby. She wasn't a biological relative, but she had become what no one else had dared to be. A true constant in a life full of change. Together they built rituals, Sunday night movie marathons, where Daniel inevitably fell asleep halfway through. Backyard gardening with Grandma Jean, who taught them how to coax life from the soil. Weekly dinners with Rebecca, full of laughter, stories, and the occasional spilled drink. Even the hard days had their place. Quiet afternoons when grief surfaced without warning, and no one tried to silence it. In those moments, silence was shared. Hugs were given, and no one had to pretend. They weren't pretending anymore. Not about who they were, not about what they'd been through, not about what they needed from one another. That honesty became their foundation. When Daniel offered Melissa a say in whether they stayed in Oakage or moved again for a new position, she didn't hesitate. "This is home," she said simply, and he nodded. Not as a man giving permission, but as a father finally understanding that family decisions were no longer his alone to make. They were a team now, a real one. In time, Melissa came to believe something she never thought possible, that being abandoned didn't have to be the end of her story. It could be the beginning of something better, something truer. She had been left, forgotten, lied to, but she had also been found, fought for, loved. And in the warm corners of this new life, surrounded by people who had chosen her not out of obligation but out of love, Melissa finally began to write a new chapter. Not about what she had lost, but about all she had found. Transformation and the courage to embrace the future. Transformation is never instant. It doesn't strike like lightning or arrive in dramatic declarations. It unfolds quietly, over time, through small choices, painful realizations, and the kind of deep internal reckoning that happens when survival no longer feels like enough. For Melissa Harper, transformation was not just a result of the horrors she and her family endured, but the deliberate decision to move forward without letting those horrors define her. She had been the girl abandoned on church steps, the sister shielding her brother in the night, the daughter forced to confront her father's disappearance and her stepmother's betrayal. But as time passed, she became something more. She became the girl who chose to stay open, who dared to hope again, who faced each uncertain day not with fear, but with resilience carved from everything she had lived through. That was her transformation. Not the absence of fear, but the will to face it. In the months that followed their father's return and the resolution of the Magnus Capital case, life did not suddenly become easy. Recovery, both physical and emotional, was slow and uneven. There were setbacks, nightmares, lingering questions. But alongside those came moments of clarity and courage. Melissa's therapy sessions, once filled with guarded silences, began to hold space for honest reflections. She talked about trust, grief, and the ache of loving people who had left her. And in doing so, she began to take ownership of her narrative. She stopped seeing herself as someone things happened to and began to recognize the strengths she had shown all along. Daniel, too, transformed, not simply from wounded to well, but from absent to present. He no longer hid behind work or guilt. He read to Eric every night, helped Melissa with school projects, and spoke openly about the mistakes he'd made. His new role as a financial crimes consultant allowed him to continue fighting for justice, but without secrecy, without putting his family at risk. And that change in profession wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. He was no longer living a double life. He was choosing transparency, stability, and fatherhood with eyes wide open. For Eric, transformation was gentler, but just as profound. No longer haunted by instability, he began to thrive. Preschool became a place of joy, not anxiety. His laughter returned, louder and freer. His artwork, once filled with stormy shapes and jagged lines, blossomed with bright colors and smiling faces. He spoke of family movie night, and Grandma Jean's cookies, and Rebecca's funny stories, as if these had always been constants. In a way, they were. Constants built not by blood but by love. And then there was Melissa's decision, quiet but monumental, to stay rooted, to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. She joined the student council at her new school. She wrote an essay about the power of found family and won first place in the state. But more than accolades, it was what she wrote that mattered. Sometimes the people who stay aren't the ones you started with, but the ones who find you when you're lost and choose to love you anyway. When asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she no longer shrugged or said, "I don't know." She said, "A social worker," because of Rebecca, because she knew what it was like to feel invisible. And now she wanted to be the person who saw others when no one else did. Her father cried when she told him. Rebecca didn't. She simply smiled and said, "I think you already are." The future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something to reach for. Melissa still carried the key Diane had left her, still hadn't decided whether she forgave the woman who had betrayed them. But she didn't feel rushed to decide. Forgiveness, she learned, wasn't a deadline, it was a process. Sometimes simply understanding that people are complicated, that they can be both cruel and loving, lost and loyal, was enough. And in that understanding, she had found peace. Not the kind that erased the past, but the kind that allowed her to live with it. One afternoon, while helping Eric clean his room, she found the USB drive again. The one that had nearly cost them everything, the one that ultimately saved their father. She held it in her hand and realized something. They had not just survived a story, they had finished one and begun another. Their family was no longer just a collection of people tied together by name. It was a living, breathing network of choice, of shared meals and shared fears, of inside jokes, bedtime routines, and Sunday hikes through the woods. Grandma Jean had moved closer. Rebecca had become a fixture at holidays. Daniel no longer worked late without notice. Eric's eyes sparkled more often than they dulled. And Melissa had grown in strength, in clarity, in courage. Because real courage, she had come to see, wasn't about running into danger. It was about showing up to your life after the danger had passed. It was about doing the hard work of healing, of opening your heart again, even when it had every reason to stay closed. She stood on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise over the treetops, the scent of pancakes drifting from the kitchen where her father and Eric were laughing over a cooking mishap. Behind her, her backpack waited, First day at her new school. She took a breath, steady and sure, and whispered the promise she'd once made on the steps of a church. I will take care of you. But now she wasn't just speaking to Eric. She was speaking to herself, to the girl she'd been, to the girl she was still becoming, and to the future she was finally ready to meet. Life lessons from Melissa's story, what her journey teaches us about resilience, family, and healing. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes it shatters in the middle of the night, on the steps of a church, or in the silence of unanswered questions. But Melissa's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, especially in our darkest moments, there is still a path forward. One of the most profound takeaways from this journey is that family isn't just about blood. It's about presence, about the people who choose to show up when it's hardest. Mrs. Patterson wasn't a relative. Rebecca wasn't in the picture at first, but both became anchors in a storm Melissa never saw coming. In a world where so many feel alone, this story reminds us that found family is real and sometimes even more powerful than the one we were born into. Another vital lesson: healing takes time. There's no shortcut through grief, betrayal, or trauma. But healing becomes possible when we stop pretending we're okay and start telling the truth to ourselves and the people around us. Daniel's transformation as a father didn't come through grand gestures, but through consistent effort and vulnerability. That's how trust is rebuilt, not by being perfect, but by being honest. Melissa also shows us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward despite fear. Whether it was shielding her brother, facing a gunman, or walking into a new school after everything changed, her bravery came in quiet, steady choices. And that's something we can all learn from. You don't have to be ready, only willing to take the next step. Finally, this story is a reminder that even when life unravels, it can be rewoven into something new, something stronger. Maybe your family looks different than you imagine. Maybe the people who hurt you never apologize. But that doesn't mean you can't write a new chapter. And maybe, just maybe, that chapter will be filled with laughter, peace, and purpose you never thought possible. So wherever you are in your story, keep going. Healing is possible, connection is possible, and most importantly, you are possible.